All right, so you wanted to understand Karl Popper, right? Well, buckle up. We're going deep into the logic of scientific discovery.
Yeah, it's like the book on the philosophy of science, like a foundational text.
Totally. We'll be looking at excerpts from the book itself, really getting into the nitty-gritty of Popper's ideas.
Not gonna lie, it can be a bit dense.
But trust me, the payoff is huge, GE. We're going to have some serious aha moments about what makes science, well, scientific.
It really changes how you think about truth and um, knowledge in general.
Exactly. That's what this deep dive is all about. So let's jump right in with one of Popper's most famous ideas. This whole problem of demarcation. How do we separate real science from everything else? Like, where do we draw that line?
Yeah, that was a big one for Popper. He wasn't satisfied with like the traditional ways of defining science, those that rely on induction and stuff.
Right, induction. That's where you're like building up knowledge from a bunch of observations.
Right, exactly. Like you see 100 white swans and you're like, okay, all swans must be white. But we all know that's not necessarily true.
Huh, yeah, that black swan can really mess things up.
Totally. See, Popper's saying real science isn't about proving things true. It's more about trying to prove them false. He calls it falsifiability.
Okay, so a good scientific theory has to be vulnerable. Like, there has to be some way it could be proven wrong.
Exactly. It needs to be testable in a way that could potentially disprove it. Popper uses Einstein's theory of relativity as an example. It makes very specific predictions that, could be wrong. If those predictions turned out to be false, well, boom, theory falsified.
I see. So it's got to be vulnerable. What about, like, Freudian psychoanalysis? How does that fit in?
Ah, good one. Popper would say some interpretations of Freud's ideas are so flexible they can basically explain anything. No matter what the behavior is, they can twist it to fit. There's no way to disprove them, so they're not truly scientific, according to Popper.
That makes sense. So it's not about piling up evidence to support your idea. It's more about making bold statements that could actually be proven wrong. That's pretty different from how a lot of people think about science, I think.
Yeah, it really flips the script. And it's important, even in everyday life, when you're evaluating all the claims you hear, think about it. Is there any evidence that could prove this claim wrong? If not, well, maybe it's not as scientific as it sounds.
That's a great point. Okay, so we've got this falsifiability thing as our measuring stick. But what about a good scientific theory? Like, what does that actually look like, according to Popper?
Well, he uses this really cool analogy. He talks about theories being like nets cast to catch the world.
Oh, I like that. So scientists are like fishermen throwing out their nets into this sea of knowledge.
Uh-huh. Yeah, kind of. But the important thing is the theory, it already exists before we start catching anything, you know?
So are you saying our theories guide our observations? It's not like we're just passively watching the world and then coming up with ideas?
Exactly. We don't just observe the world and then come up with theories. Our observations are always shaped by our pre-existing ideas.
So it's like we're wearing these theoretical glasses that change how we see everything.
Exactly. And then, of course, what we observe can lead us to, modify our theories or even toss them out completely. It's a back and forth, a dance between theory and evidence.
So you're getting at this idea that there's no such thing as a purely objective observation. Even something as simple as, like, seeing the color of something is influenced by what we already know about colors and light.
Right. Popper says there's no such thing as a purely observational language that's totally free from theory. Every observation already has some kind of theoretical framework behind it.
Wow, that's making me rethink what I consider a fact. So we're testing these nets, these theories, by basically trying to poke holes in them.
Right.
We want to see if they hold up. But if it's all about proving theories wrong, doesn't that make science kind of a bummer? Like, are we just setting ourselves up for failure all the time?
Haha. I can see why you might think that. But Popper actually sees falsification as, like, the engine of scientific progress. It's like testing a bridge by driving heavier and heavier trucks over it. If it breaks, you learn something important about its limits.
So the harder we try to disprove our theories, the stronger they actually become. Interesting.
Exactly. The more a theory withstands those really tough tests, the more confident we can be in it. He calls this corroboration. It's not about proving a theory true, but about, pushing its boundaries to see how much it can handle. Think about your own beliefs. Have you ever held on to an idea even when, like, the evidence suggested you might be wrong?
Oh, definitely. I think we all do that sometimes.
Right. Well, falsification, even though it can be uncomfortable, is actually how we get closer to the truth. It helps us let go of faulty ideas and replace them with, more robust ones.
That's a great point. It's like personal growth through intellectual mistakes. Haha. But wait a minute. What about all those experiments that confirm a theory? Don't those count for something?
Ah, that brings us to another really important issue that Popper tackles, the problem of induction.
Okay, let's break down this induction thing, because isn't science also about building general knowledge from specific observations? Like, isn't that a big part of it?
It is. That's, how science has traditionally been understood. But Popper was super critical of induction. He said, no matter how many confirming examples you have, you can never logically prove a universal statement.
Okay, so even if I see 1,000 white swans, I can't be absolutely sure that there's not a black swan hiding out there somewhere.
Exactly. And that's the problem with relying on induction as like the foundation of scientific knowledge. It's always vulnerable to being overturned by like a single counterexample.
So how do we get around this problem? If we can't rely on confirming instances to prove a theory, what can we do?
That's where Popper introduces this really cool idea of corroboration. It's not about how much confirming evidence you have, but about the severity and variety of tests a theory has passed.
Okay, so it's like it's like the difference between having a weak alibi that falls apart under questioning,
Yeah.
and one that's been like thoroughly investigated and holds up.
That's a great way to put it. A theory that's been tested in lots of different ways and hasn't been disproven, that's a highly corroborated theory. It doesn't prove the theory, but it builds confidence in how robust it is. And this isn't just about science either. Think about arguments in general. Are we more convinced by someone who gives us like a ton of weak reasons or someone who makes a few really strong, well-supported points?
Right. It's about the quality of the evidence, not just the quantity. So we're not looking for proof in that traditional sense. We're looking for theories that have really been put through the ringer and come out stronger. Okay, this is all making sense. But what about probability? Where does that fit in with all of this?
Probability. That's a tricky one. See, Popper says statements about probabilities aren't falsifiable in the same way as, like, singular statements about specific events.
Hold on. Why not? It seems like you could test a probability statement, right? Just compare it to what actually happens.
Well, you can definitely compare them, but here's the thing. No finite number of observations can definitively prove or disprove a statement about probability.
So if a coin lands on heads 10 times in a row, that doesn't necessarily mean the probability of getting heads is actually 1.
Exactly. It's still possible the coin is fair and you just got really lucky or unlucky 10 times in a row.
Okay, I'm starting to see the problem. So how does Popper deal with probability then?
He makes a distinction between two types of probability. First, you've got statistical probability, which is all about the actual frequency of events in a sequence, like with the coin flips.
Right.
Then there's logical probability, which is more about how much a theory has been corroborated, how well it stood up to testing.
So a theory that's been really well tested, that's got a high logical probability, even if we can't put an exact number on it.
Right. For Popper, corroboration is about how well a theory has handled being tested, not necessarily its likelihood of being absolutely true. It's like that nets analogy again.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So the better the net, the more it can catch. Even if we never know for sure everything that's out there in the ocean. Okay, this is all pretty mind-bending. But if science isn't about finding the truth in some absolute way, then what is the point? What are we even aiming for?
Haha, good question. And that takes us right to the heart of what Popper's all about. He believes the goal of science is to come up with the best explanations of the world that we can. Explanations that are, as comprehensive and testable as possible. We're always striving for better explanations, even though we can never be absolutely certain that we've found the ultimate truth.
So it's about getting closer and closer to the truth, even though we might never actually, arrive?
Exactly. And it's about being honest about the fact that we don't know everything. Popper rejects this idea that science is about building a perfect, complete picture of reality. Instead, he sees it as like a never-ending process of problem solving.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey of constantly improving our understanding.
You got it. And that journey is always full of surprises.
I love that. All right, I think it's a good time to recap what we've covered so far, just to make sure we're all on the same page. What do you think?
Definitely. Let's do it.
Okay, so we started with Popper challenging how we usually define science, right? He introduces falsifiability as the key. A good theory has to be disprovable. Then we talked about how theories are like nets we use to understand the world. And that led us to this idea that there's no such thing as a completely objective observation, right? Everything we see is filtered through our own theoretical assumptions.
That's a good summary so far.
We also dug into how Popper sees this whole falsification thing is a good thing. Like, it actually pushes us towards better theories. It's all about corroboration. And then we tackled this whole messy issue of probability, learned about the difference between statistical probability and logical probability.
Right, and how logical probability is tied to how thoroughly a theory has been tested.
I'm really struck by how these ideas, even though they come from philosophy, are so relevant to, like, everyday life.
Absolutely. It's not just about science. It's about how we think critically, how we evaluate information in all areas of life.
So let's keep going. There's still so much more to uncover in the logic of scientific discovery. Next up, we're going to delve even deeper into Popper's ideas about probability. We'll get a bit more technical and explore some of the tools he developed.
Things are about to get even more fascinating.
Stay tuned, because this deep dive is just getting started.
All right, so last time, remember, we were wrestling with probability, Popper's take on it.
Yeah, that was a lot to unpack. Like how probability statements, according to Popper, aren't as easily falsifiable. It's not like those specific event claims. It kind of left me wondering where probability really fits into his whole framework.
Yeah, for sure. It can be a bit of a head scratcher, even for, seasoned Popper fans. Remember those two types of probability he talks about?
Oh, right. Statistical and logical, wasn't it?
You got it. Statistical is all about how often something happens, like classic coin flip example, how many times it lands on heads. Straightforward stuff.
Right, the frequency of something within a larger sequence of events. Makes sense.
Exactly. Logical probability, though, that's where things get a bit more nuanced. It's about how well a theory has been tested, how much corroboration it's got. And here's the kicker. Popper says a statement's logical probability can actually change without its statistical probability changing at all.
Wait, hold on. How's that work? That seems kind of counterintuitive.
I know, right? But think about it this way. Let's say we've got a theory about a new medication. Early trials, small group of patients, they show like an 80% success rate.
Okay, so statistically, the probability of that medicine working is 80%.
Right. Now imagine more research is done, right? Way bigger study, more diverse group of patients. But the results stay the same. 80% success. Statistically, nothing's changed.
Right, but something feels different about it, right? Like we trust the results more now.
Bingo! That's the logical probability shifting. Even though the numbers are the same, the theory has been corroborated by a much bigger, more rigorous set of tests. We have stronger reasons to trust it.
That's a really subtle distinction, but important. It's like the difference between a small pilot study and then a huge clinical trial with, tons of participants. They might show the same result, but we'd feel more confident in the big trial.
Absolutely. You're getting right at what Popper's trying to say. It's about the weight of the evidence. How strong are those tests that a theory's managed to pass? Not just the raw numbers.
It's making me think about how scientific studies are reported,
Yeah.
Just because a study shows something, it doesn't mean we should take it as gospel truth.
For sure. We got to look at the whole picture. The methods they use, how many people were in the study, have other researchers found the same thing? Popper gives us the tools to think critically, not just blindly accept stuff.
Right, so we're not just passively absorbing information, we're actively evaluating it. Whether it's about, like, a new drug or some physics breakthrough or even just stuff we see online.
100%. That's what Popper's all about. Cultivating that critical thinking mindset, that healthy skepticism, not rejecting everything outright, but demanding good evidence and rigorous testing, always pushing for more.
Okay, so logical probability is tied to this corroboration thing.
Yeah.
Did Popper, actually formalize this? Did he have some math formula to calculate it all?
That's where things get even more interesting. He knew you couldn't just slap a precise number on logical probability, not like with statistical. But he did come up with ways to compare the logical probability of different theories.
Okay, I'm listening. How did he do that?
Well, one big concept is logical content. Popper says the more a theory claims, the more it's trying to explain, the less probable it is to actually be true.
That makes sense intuitively, right? If a theory tries to explain everything, it's probably overreaching, not very reliable.
Exactly. A broad, sweeping theory is harder to test, harder to falsify, but a specific, targeted theory that's got more logical content because it's making bolder, more risky claims, so it's more easily falsifiable.
So like a theory that says some swans are white, that's less risky, less bold than saying all swans are white.
Exactly. That second one has more content. It's sticking its neck out more, making itself vulnerable.
Ah, okay, I get it. Logical probability is tied to how testable the theory is, but how do you actually compare the logical probabilities of two different theories? How do we know which one's got more of that truth-likeness?
Popper's got more concepts for that. He talks about verisimilitude. Basically, it means how close a theory is to being true. We can't be 100% sure, but we can say one theory is closer than another.
It's like aiming for a bullseye. We might not hit it dead on, but we can see which shots are closer to the center.
Perfect analogy. And then, of course, we have corroboration, a theory that's survived a ton of tough tests, that's more likely to be closer to the truth, to have more of that verisimilitude.
So we're looking for theories that are bold, that are testable, and that have really been put through the ringer. But there's always a chance, right, that a new test could come along and completely overturn even our most well-established ideas.
Oh, absolutely. That's what keeps science so dynamic. It's a never-ending process. And that brings us back to embracing fallibility. We shouldn't get too attached to our theories, no matter how well they seem to be working. Always got to be open to the possibility of being wrong, of needing to revise our ideas.
Wow, that's pretty humbling.
It is, but it's also incredibly exciting. It means we're always learning, pushing the boundaries of what we know, always open to new discoveries.
Okay, my brain is definitely doing some heavy lifting here. We've covered statistical versus logical probability, logical content, verisimilitude. Popper's got a lot of cool ideas.
He does, doesn't he? It's challenging stuff, but it's worth the effort. It makes you rethink the whole nature of knowledge, how we figure things out.
Okay, before we move on, let's do a quick recap of this section.
Good idea, yeah.
So we went deeper into Popper's view of probability, that difference between statistical and logical probability, and how a theory's logical probability can change even if the stats stay the same. We also talk about how Popper tries to make these ideas more formal with logical content and verisimilitude. The big takeaway: science isn't about finding theories that are 100% proven. It's about finding those that are bold, testable, and that have survived a lot of attempts to disprove them. But, gotta remember, even our best theories might be wrong.
That's a perfect summary. And it sets us up really well to explore the wider implications of Popper's work.
I'm ready to see where all of this leads. Let's keep going. Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into Karl Popper's The Logic of Scientific Discovery. And man, we've covered some serious ground. Falsifiability, corroboration, probability.
Yeah, the whole shebang. But now, I think it's time to zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture. What does all of this really mean for how we understand science, knowledge, the whole deal?
I'm ready. Hit me with those big picture takeaways.
Okay, so one of the huge implications of Popper's work is it changes how we think about scientific progress. Like, the old way of seeing things, science was this march towards certainty. Gather more knowledge, add it to the pile, eventually we'll have this perfect understanding of everything.
Right, like building this giant, complete encyclopedia of all knowledge.
Exactly. But Popper throws a wrench in that. He says we can never truly prove a theory 100% true. So scientific knowledge is always like temporary, always open to being changed.
So instead of a solid encyclopedia, it's more like a Wikipedia page, constantly being updated.
Perfect analogy. Our current theories, they're always subject to change as new evidence pops up. Even our most cherished scientific ideas could be totally overturned tomorrow.
I can see how that might make some people nervous. But honestly, it also makes science way more dynamic.
Yeah.
Like, there's always this possibility of some new discovery that blows everything wide open.
That's the beauty of it. And Popper would say this uncertainty, it's actually a strength. It keeps us humble, it keeps us questioning, and it pushes us to always search for better explanations.
So it's not about reaching some final destination. It's about enjoying the ride, the constant process of refining how we understand the world.
You got it. Popper rejects this idea that science is about creating some perfect final picture of reality. It's more like a constant process of problem solving, always adapting, always refining.
Okay, I like that. So let's talk about that process. How does scientific discovery actually happen, according to Popper?
He calls it a cycle of conjectures and refutations. Starts with a problem, some weird phenomenon we don't understand, a question that needs answering.
So we observe something that doesn't fit with what we currently know, something that makes us go, huh, that's weird.
Exactly. And then we come up with a conjecture, a bold guess about how it might work. It's basically a hypothesis, a tentative explanation that we can put to the test.
So it's like we're being creative, right? Coming up with solutions to this puzzle we've stumbled upon.
Totally. But here's the key. We then try to refute our conjecture. We design experiments, really try to find flaws, inconsistencies, anything that might prove our idea wrong.
So we're not trying to prove ourselves right, we're trying to prove ourselves wrong. It seems kind of backwards, but I guess that's how we actually learn.
You got it. By actively trying to disprove our ideas, we force ourselves to think harder, consider other explanations, refine our understanding. It pushes us forward.
Okay, so what happens if our conjecture actually survives? If it passes all those tests?
Then we say it's been corroborated. It stood up to our attempts to knock it down. But it's super important to remember, corroborated doesn't equal proven. It just means it's working so far. Could still be overturned by new evidence later on.
Like a never-ending game of scientific whack-a-mole. We keep coming up with ideas, testing them. Some stick around for a while, but there's always a chance something new will come along and change everything.
Haha, yeah, that's a great way to put it. And this actually highlights another cool thing about Popper's thinking: the role of creativity in science. It's not just about following strict rules and procedures. It needs imagination, intuition, thinking outside the box.
So scientists aren't just cold, calculating logicians. They're more like, I don't know, artists or explorers, always
Yeah.
pushing boundaries.
Totally. Popper sees scientific progress as being driven by these bold, creative people who are willing to challenge what everyone else thinks, to put forward new ideas, even if those ideas seem crazy at first.
Like all those huge breakthroughs in history, right? Copernicus, Galileo, Darwin, Einstein. They all shook things up. They weren't afraid to go against the grain.
Exactly. And that's why this whole idea of embracing fallibility is so important. We need a scientific culture where it's okay to be wrong, to make mistakes, to change your mind when new evidence comes along.
Right, because being afraid to be wrong just stifles creativity. We got to celebrate the process of discovery, even when it leads to unexpected places.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Okay, so we've talked about how Popper changes how we view progress in science, how knowledge is always open to revision, and how creativity and risk-taking are essential. What a journey.
Yeah, tell me about it. My brain is definitely feeling that workout we talked about.
Mine too. It's challenging stuff, but seriously, so worth thinking about. Popper's ideas are still super relevant today, maybe even more so, considering how much information we're all bombarded with constantly.
Right. Claims and counterclaims everywhere you look. It's hard to know what to believe sometimes.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have that critical mindset Popper talks about. Question assumptions, demand evidence, be open to changing your mind.
So next time you hear someone making a claim, especially a scientific one, ask yourself, could this actually be proven wrong? What kind of evidence would make me rethink this?
Those are the questions that matter. Keep those in mind, and you're on the right track.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the logic of scientific discovery. We've only just scratched the surface here, folks. This book is packed with even more thought-provoking stuff. Definitely encourage everyone to check it out. Keep those brain muscles working.
Absolutely.
Happy reading. And until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on.